Hi, welcome. What should you consider when buying property here in WA? That's our topic of tonight. Well, at least that's going to be the starting point tonight. Hi, all. Welcome to Property Avenue WA. I'm Tony Viner, and that little grey-haired fellow on the other side, here's Oscar D'Souza. Our broadcast is to provide you with an avenue to a range of property matters here in Western Australia, and the focus is very much WA. So we look forward to because we're live and because we're doing this live stream. You can we've got a live chat line that you can send us questions associated with property. There may be something very, very simple, but we're happy to answer it. This episode, we're going to provide some thoughts and tips that may help you if you are a first-time home buyer, or perhaps you're even a home buyer that's just getting back into the market and you're planning to sell and you want to look at home buying. Then hopefully we can provide a little bit of info in this market that's a little bit different to the norm, to what we've been experiencing over the last 4 or 5 years. Things have changed. So there's a few things that we've identified that may help you. We'll review and discuss Oscar's stats, and we'll discuss some answers to some of your property questions. The one question that we've got tonight, which I find is really, really interesting, is about buying a property, but they're not sure what name to put it in. So it's a really good question because it's associated with a self-managed super fund. So that is a question that we'll raise and discover the answer to. We'll look at some of the property headlines. We were going to review the budget, and I don't think it's too late to do that next week. Only reason being, we did tell you last week that we were going to have one Justin Collins on board this week and discuss insurance, but unfortunately a work commitment was a late cancellation. So you've got Oscar and I. How exciting. But next week, we have got a very special guest. We have got the manager, who is no shortage of comment at times on our program. He's coming on board, one Jody Bevan from Bendigo, and we're looking forward to him. And I thought he would be a great guest to have, not only to discuss banking, but also perhaps we can have a chat to him too with regard to the budget and what that means to the property world, what that means to the banking world. And perhaps that might be a really good thing. So that's our plan for next week, and that's our plan for this week. So we hope you enjoy it. Really, really welcome you to ask questions, and we're looking forward to getting stuck in. OD, mate, it's been a busy week. We've had holding the ball rule has been a bit of an issue in the AFL. The Olympians have come out and told us what they're going to wear, and they look pretty snappy for the Olympics, which I do hope it's on, but I'm not sure. I'm still not confident. And then, of course, the chatter about property has not stopped, has it? I mean, it's still happening in the cafes. It's still happening in the office. And you've also, before we went on air, you had some breaking news, which we'll talk about that too shortly. So welcome, mate. How was the week? How was the week?
Mate, really, really good week. And it's really interesting, though, whenever you ask me that every week, so how's the week been? And we always make comment that it's been such a busy week already, bearing in mind this is Tuesday night. So, it's relatively early in the week, but I guess a lot of real estate stuff happens over the weekend, like probably most of it. So the real estate week really isn't a Monday to Friday type thing. If anything, it's like a Friday to Friday type thing. And when we get to Tuesday night, it really is, it's kind of like midweek, where most of the action for the course of the week in real estate has basically happened. But good evening to viewers, good evening to the listeners that will be listening on podcasts as well. Mate, it's a really, really, it's a great time. It is a really, really great time in WA real estate at the moment, and I'll touch on the stats shortly, but my discussion with very good salespeople around the WA industry, my discussion with property managers as well, is in general that sting, that FOMO that we've seen that has dominated play throughout the whole year has really started to subside. And that's a very good thing. It's not bad news. It's actually a very good thing. It's the market, both rental and sales markets are still very, very busy. There's no question about that. But that FOMO, that craziness, that absurd level of dealing and absurd level of people coming through home opens, that seems to, over the course of May, seems to have fizzled out a little bit. And if anything, we can move more towards a sustainable, healthy, and still a growth market, but just not that craziness level. So it's actually really, really good news. and I look forward to pulling that apart with you a little bit over the next half an hour when we look at the stats. And also maybe work out, well, why is that happening? What are the reasons for that? But and the other thing being as well, Jody Bevan, I can't wait to get JB on board. Not just from the budget talk that we'll have with him, but he's such an influential member of the Midwest community. He's been there for so long with very large banking organisations, and including his current role as well. And I can't wait to talk to him about how he's seeing things, and importantly, how are his customers, his banking clients, where do they think things are at, and what do they have in terms of expectations for the rest of 2021. So we've got a great show lined up over the next half an hour, and I just can't wait to get stuck into it with my main man, Tony Viner.
Talking about JB, I think the other thing, you're an idiot. You know that, don't you? Before we go any further, you're very, very professional and you're very, very good, but you're an idiot. But before we do, the fact being is that you talk about JB. The other thing that I'm really interested to talk to him about is the model, the Bendigo Community Bank model, which I think is a really intriguing model. And that in itself will be worthwhile having a chat next week about. So look forward to that. But we move on to this week. And before I go any further, you know how important it is with our disclaimer, because not only do we do a live stream tonight, but tomorrow you'll be able to listen with our podcast wherever you get your podcast or listen to your podcast. Then that will be available. It's available every Wednesday. So I must advise you that general advice disclaimer, the information on this podcast is to be regarded as general advice. Your personal objectives, needs, and financial circumstances were not taken into account when preparing this content. I got it correct. Yay! For those that don't understand, I often stumble on that word. I use all sorts of words other than content. We always advise and recommend you seek personal, professional, and financial advice tailored to your specific individual needs before making financial, property, and investment decisions. And a couple of the questions that I've got here tonight are classics, where it is so important to get your independent professional advice to assist you when it comes to buying property. And in particular, if you're involved in self-managed funds or you're buying a property for investment, and you're not necessarily going to be putting in your own name. So that's a couple of questions we've got coming up. But the question of the night, the big thing tonight was, what should you consider when buying property in WA? Do you want to do that first, or do you want to hit the headlines? The other thing that I found really interesting, do you want to start on? We had Squizzy Taylor on. Now, for those that we're very personal here when we talk about some of our guests, but Warren Taylor, who has a building company called Warren Taylor Homes, a well-respected and won his share of awards in the last couple of years just quietly. He's a builder in the Midwest region, up in Geraldton and that way. And we had him on a couple of weeks ago in our 51st episode. And he made mention about the building industry and how things can change very quickly. And before we went live with this stream, you made comment that you picked up some news with regard to, which is quite disturbing. Would you want to expand on that?
Mate, I will expand on it to the extent of the news that I know. And look, the bottom line is it's a tragedy. There's a major builder here in WA, and I think they might actually do construction outside of WA, but a major builder by the name of Pindan Constructions. The news just out in the last 3 hours is that Pindan has actually gone into administration. Now, Pindan is it's a massive company. I don't know how long it's been around, but it's a long time. It's not been around for 5 or 6 years. It's been around for a long time, specialising in both commercial and also industrial development. So they do unit developments, apartment developments, and they certainly do their fair share of commercial construction as well. But news literally just in is that Pindan has gone into administration, and the news is reporting that they owe creditors in excess of $100 million. So if that is the case, and it appears to be, that's an absolute tragedy for everyone, for the creditors, for the board of Pindan, for the employees of Pindan. for the investors, the shareholders of Pindan. But just it does really relate to what we discussed with Warren Taylor a couple of weeks ago, TV, and that is with the construction market and what has happened over the last 12 months with the incentives being provided to the end user of the homes, people that are looking at building homes, and the pressure that has placed on builders. You can't get a residential builder anywhere inside 12 and probably up to 18 months, be it the Perth metropolitan area or even regional WA. And meanwhile, it's created a massive demand for the construction industry, which is great coming out of COVID. So it's a really, really good thing. But what we're also seeing is massive cost escalation, both in the cost of materials, but also the cost of labour as well. And as Squizzy Taylor mentioned, that has the plus side is that the builders' books over the next couple of years can look really, really full because they've got so much booked work. But the downside is if they have to absorb all of or the bulk of these cost increases, and that goes straight into their bottom line and straight into their profit, that makes their business even viable, then that can place a great deal of pressure on the building company. And in some cases, small business, large business, it can actually send the business under. That may have happened to Pindan. We will find out, I guess, over the remainder of this week exactly how Pindan's gotten into this shape. But it wouldn't surprise me if they've committed to several building contracts and now are unable to deliver for whatever the reasons are. But largely, I would think that would relate to their own internal cost pressures. So again, very, very sad story that Pindan has gone into administration. And I guess we'll hear a lot more detail in the headlines over the next few days.
The flow-on effect on that as well is going to put more pressure on the building industry because work that now Pindan were attending to is no longer can be completed. So that becomes another major issue as well, where you've got people waiting for their homes, be it units or complexes. Was it Pindan that did the South Perth units there on the complex there? Was that Pindan? I'm just trying to think now. I know they've done a lot around the traps.
They've certainly done plenty through South Perth, but I don't know which development you're referring to.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think. I know, but yeah, the flow-on effect would be massive. And when we spoke to Squizzy a couple of weeks ago, it was an issue that he really highlighted, and it was an interesting insight when you talk to someone like that, who's giving you, and Squiz is straight down to earth. He's straight down the line and tells you as it is. And I found it really, really a great chat because he just told you as it is. And I suppose he's only small fry in the scheme of things, but still having to carry a huge load financially. And so you can imagine a company like Pindan and the impact on the building industry across the board in WA, huge, absolutely huge. And as you say, terribly, terribly sad. I mean, it's just, they are not stories you want to hear, particularly in a market like we're experiencing at the moment.
Yeah, and the fallout, you just touched on it, the fallout for partially completed projects as well. Those projects must go on. They can't just sit there dormant. And then there's going to be a reliance on the other builders effectively to come along and pick up those projects from where they've been left off. That is on the basis that someone doesn't come in and rescue the Pindan ship, and life will go on for Pindan, but probably under a different name. So that's on the assumption that doesn't happen. But invariably, you've got every other builder's under so much pressure anyway. If they weren't, there'd be more builders that might consider taking over Pindan's work. But taking over another builder's work comes with a massive set of its own challenges and risks, where those risks are normally factored into the building costs of whichever builder that comes to take it over from that point in time. So what I'm saying is those building costs that were already high suddenly become a lot higher to account for the risk of the new builder that's going to come in and rescue the project. So it's a show like Pindan going down it's sad. It's an absolute tragedy. But I dare say as well, it's going to be very complicated for the administrators to work their way out of. So I'm sure we'll follow that over the next few weeks. We'll check in with that on our show, because I'm also certain that Pindan won't be the only one as well. Every other builder's got the same cost pressures.
I'm going to introduce a bella. I'm going to have to read. I'm going to.
A bell?
Yep. I just think so. We go ding ding. We've used the time. I've looked at the clock and thought, oh God, we're already behind time. Right. Our question tonight, our major question tonight, when it came to our topic, what should you consider when buying property here in Western Australia? And I thought it was a really, I've sort of been having a think, and I've read a whole variety of articles over recent weeks and thought this is really worth discussing. I think between the two of us, with some of the things that I've had clients ask of me, and I'm sure you're talking with real estate fraternity. So I thought, why not be a great topic, not only just for the first home buyer, but also for the home buyer. I mean, remembering too, I always say this, and I make this comment to so many people, and they say, oh, I should have known that, or I spoke to such and such because he's bought a property before. How long ago and how often? You've got to be careful that you're getting the expertise from people that their expertise is the fact they bought a house 5 years ago or they bought a house 6 months ago. Doesn't necessarily mean what they're trying to advise you. I know people are trying to be helpful, but sometimes it's not helpful and sometimes it's not really the right advice. So we thought we'd discuss that. And as I say, there's been a number of different articles. One was so I thought we'd start off with the fact that how should a buyer go about the process when we've got a market like it is? What are your thoughts? How would you like to start that off?
Look, TV, the first question that I think that is most relevant to any buying decision is why. That why and that motive. What is the goal? Because it does vary. It absolutely varies. And I think typically everyone would like to see their properties go up in value. So generally that remains consistent. But there's always a few other factors as well, that capital growth is not the sole or the dominating factor. So no matter what, the first question always needs to be, what's your motivation? What's the why for you to get into a property?
Yep. And then we get to that point, and I think you've raised this more than once, and I know when we've spoken to Kieran, sometimes, particularly if you're a first home buyer, you might be the home buyer who's going to downsize. So therefore you need to identify, I believe you need to identify what you're going to do. And certainly in this market, and we've had this question raised in one of our episodes 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is the game plan to sell and then buy rather than there used to be, certainly probably 6 months ago, 9 months ago, there was no shortage of contracts that we saw. And when I say we, I'm talking about our settlement agency, Champion Bay Settlements, whereby you would have a contract where it's subject to the successful sale and settlement of my home and I'm buying a property. Those conditions you're not seeing as often at the moment because, as we discussed previously, as I say, 2 or 3 episodes ago, perhaps first things first, if you can't raise short-term finance, then it may be a case of having to look at selling your home first.
Yeah, I think what we've learned in the last 12 months, the best way to go about it is for you to find the property that you want to buy, that you want to move to, or that you want to acquire, and sort that bit out first. We've sorted out with the contract of sale, with the actual purchase, sorted out with your financier, and then after that, if the next bit of that equation is for you to sell your own property, then that's what should come second. And the primary reason for that at the moment, TV, is the shortage of housing, where we've had, and I know of a number of different parties that have sold their property thinking that they'll find their new property in time, but then that doesn't happen because the competition for their new property is so high, so they end up missing out. And typically in any other market, well, that's okay. If they can't find the property that they want, well, they'll just rent for 6 months or 12 months until they do. But that, as we know, also hasn't been an option because there's been such high competition for properties in the rental market as well. So definitely the best way to do it, I believe, is find your next housing decision in terms of where you're next going to go. And we know that the market at the moment is very buoyant, very strong, that it should be an easier task to sell the property that you're currently in, if that's what you need to do in order to complete the transaction.
So are you saying if we're going to sell with the intention of buying, I suppose one of the things we need to do is, if we're planning to sell to buy, then obviously we've got to ensure that our property that we're selling is in order and ready to sell, because it's going to sell quickly. It's going to sell quickly.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what you want. That's what you want to happen. You want it to sell quickly, and if anything, you need it to sell quickly as well, because you've already committed to your next purchase. So in most cases, you're going to need that to happen quickly. So don't go and put a property under contract and then spend another 4 weeks getting your current place ready for sale with painting and carpets and all that, because that's simply time that you don't have in the current market.
Yep. Absolutely. The other thing being is that with regard to if you're a buyer, and I'll go back to the first home buyer, and you've emphasised this on more than one occasion, identify the property, but not necessarily, from my observation, and I've said this to a few people, don't necessarily get hung up on, if there's a heap of people that are interested in a property, then there's a fair chance that price is going to be driven due to numbers. And so maybe that's depending on where you're at with your budget. You need to be a little bit sensible as to what you're going to buy, and that's where your planning comes into it, and that's where you need to sort of work out what you can afford, because you've got to be careful that you don't get caught up in the emotion and you're buying something that the price is sort of perhaps not the price that it probably should be. You could be caught up on the emotion of it all. And there's certainly been properties that I've identified with clients where they've gone and bought above asking price.
Yeah, that's exactly right, TV. The other side of the coin is, and particularly when we're talking to first home buyers, and I look forward to talking to Kieran, our first home buyer that we've been following over the last few months as well, is when you're looking at, most of the time these days, first home buyers are looking to get into the market. That's their primary goal. That's their primary motive, or their why, like I mentioned before. But when you start drilling down with them, okay, so what sort of properties are you looking at? What's your budget? A lot of their own personal preferences, a lot of their own motivations come into it. I want that location, it's close to work, that's too small, I need a yard for the dog. All these other bits and pieces come into it, which seem to actually take precedence over the primary goal, and that is to get into the market. Because right now, with prices going up, it gets harder and harder for first home buyers to actually get into the market. So if the primary goal is to get into the market, those other items of a large yard and being close to work probably need to be a pretty distant second and third, because otherwise you might miss the boat altogether. I'm pretty certain with Kieran at the moment that we're now, what are we, May? We're probably three and a half months down the track of his buying journey, where to our knowledge I don't think he's actually bought a property yet. So I'm sure 3.5 months ago he wouldn't have thought that this would be the situation where he hasn't been able to put pen to paper, and I dare say there'd be a level of frustration creeping in there, which either he says, that's it, I'm just going to buy whatever I can get my hands on, or he says, that's it, wave the white flag, I'm just not even going to worry about it anymore. So I guess we'll find out a bit more from him when we next get to chat to the young fella.
Yeah, well, that was meant to be, I was meant to do that last week, or I was planning to do that last week with him, but you were busy and I was busy, so we put that on hold, but we will definitely follow that up. And as I said, it might be one of those pre-recorded ones that we'll do that will specifically identify the first home buyer journey rather than be our normal episode. The other thing we talk about with regard to that, we're talking about home buyers, is I suppose because, as you say, the market is not quite a frenzy that it was before, but it's really important that if you're going to deal with a real estate agent, that you register your interest so they know that you're out there. And because sometimes trying to do it yourself is not always the best option. So you've got real estate agents out there who are experts in their field. You've got to identify, not like in all professions, there's going to be some that are not necessarily what we would expect, or the standards that we would expect. But the fact being is, the majority of cases, that they're there to look after you. Yes, they're paid by the seller, but register your interest and show if you've got a particular area that you've identified. Then would that not be a logical thing to do, is get in touch with an agent or two and let them be aware, because they have registers, do they not?
Yeah, they do. And, these days, particularly over the last 6 months with the conditions that we've had, maybe they've been a little bit lax in terms of keeping those buyer registers, because they haven't needed to, TV. They've got so many buyers. They don't need to spend too much time following up buyers, because the buyers are at them so much. But as you just mentioned, this month, there seems to be that level of crazy activity seems to have dropped off a little bit. It's still very strong, but that craziness and that ridiculous sting has certainly dropped out of the market for the time being anyway, which is a really good thing for all parties. And real estate salespeople, when they're talking about marketing to a seller of the house, when they're trying to work out the marketing budget and where they're going to advertise the property, there's this famous saying that they've got, and it is, you can't sell a secret, which means your property is so great, there's no point going light on the marketing and only telling 10 out of 100 people. We want 100 out of 100 people to know about it, because we don't want it to be a secret. We want everyone to know about it and create as much interest in your property as is out there. And the way to do that is to not make it a secret, make it a big story. Similarly, you can't buy a property as a secret buyer. That's just the way that it goes. So if you're wanting to buy in this current market, don't try and do it secretively, because that's just not going to work for you. You need to let the real estate agents know that you're around, that you're in the market, and what you're in the market for. So that's really good advice too, Ed.
The other thing being that they could is also with a buyer, that if you are showing some interest in a property, I've certainly had that where people have engaged me on a consulting basis to discuss, because they didn't know where to start, etc., without buying. But in some cases, I've sort of said, hey, slow down. You can't put every special condition that everybody's telling you about on a contract, because basically you're just going to scare the seller. The seller's not interested, because there's plenty of other choices of buyers. So I think my advice to some people that have asked my opinion is, be sensible and be respectful. And I think at the same boat, consider the fact that, what if that was you selling? What would you be expecting? What would you be looking for if buyers were coming to you and you had to make a choice of who was going to? It's not all about price. Obviously, it has a big influence, but in some cases, with some people, it's not all about price. So I think you need to be, in my opinion, as I say, be careful and be sensible with your special conditions. Special conditions are still a very important part of when you buy a property, and obviously get people's advice for that, independent advice even, but be sensible and respect the seller.
Yeah. And just going back to, you've used the word respect or respectful a few times. That's really important. I'm not in the game of selling. I'm in the game of renting properties. And just for the properties that I've rented over the last fortnight, there's a strong demand for any rental property that goes on the market. And I know myself what it's like to deal with the different types of people, or certainly the way in which that they project themselves when they're talking to me about the property. And it really does, because I'm human too. So it really does have a lasting impact, human to human, that can work largely in your favour. But if you're not good at being human, if you don't have a good set of personal skills, or are approachable, then that's going to impact on whether the real estate agent and or the landlord or the seller is actually going to end up dealing with you. So in this market, work everything to your favour. Be a nice person. Be respectful, as TV's mentioned a few times. And if the property's for you, then it's much easier to join the dots, being that sort of a respectful person than being the aggressor.
Yes, and that gets back to my point with regard to, I was going to say, uh, not being difficult. And I think that's something as well. That's the same, along the same lines, is don't be difficult with what you're planning to do. Understand, I suppose there needs to be an element of patience, but understand there's a lot of other buyers out there too who are all on the same planet as you, and they're all trying to do the same thing. So I suppose you need to be patient, but that doesn't mean that you need to be difficult with the process. And I think that will help your cause as well, as you just highlighted. The other thing that I would also suggest, I wrote a few things here, pre-approvals. You know, we talk about getting finance and understanding, but I heard the other day someone was saying to me, and I'm trying to recall who, and if one of our finance people are watching or listening, perhaps they might come back to us. But the whisper I heard was that pre-approvals were not getting the priority by the lenders as they once were, because they're so busy just getting the actual applications sorted and underway. Have you heard anything along those lines?
No, I haven't. I've only heard the first half of the story, and that is that the banks, the lenders are so tied up dealing on actual sale contracts and actual finance applications that. But so far as pre-approvals being pushed to the back of the line, no matter. I haven't heard that. It would make a lot of sense though.
Yeah, uh, which comes to the point that you, even though you may not be doing pre-approval, that doesn't mean you wouldn't go to a banker or a broker and discuss what your financial capabilities are. And it may not mean necessarily getting pre-approval, but it may assist you to have an understanding of what your shopping ability is, if you like. You can have an understanding of, like, okay, this is as far as I can go. If I want to be really, really silly, this is the maximum. This is where I can max out to. But I would not personally. I wouldn't recommend you try and max out. And that's where I think you've got to be a bit sensible, as we stated before.
Yeah, I think you'd just be wasting your time and everyone else's time if you didn't have some level of pre-qualification with a bank, with a mortgage broker, or some sort of a financial planner. So, and not just everyone else's, but you'd waste your own time as well. So, work out what your shopping list is, work out what your budget is before you even go looking.
Um, and we talk about agents, but you know, the other thing that I've had clients have also buyers been successful with is a private sale. It's not
Oh, yeah.
always, what we do here is not about specifics. It's about property across the board. So we cover all angles. And in fact, we're going to get get a guest on in the next couple of weeks. He's coming on board from Agent in a Box, and he attends to private sales. So, you may be a buyer that's looking, and you may be going to various sites, but there may also be a private option that may suit you, and you're comfortable doing that and talking directly to the seller. But again, I do a lot of work in this area, but I strongly recommend that if you're going to do private sale or a private purchase, I strongly recommend that you get someone with some knowledge and some expertise to assist you, because at the end of the day, if you muck up the contract, if you both decide, oh, well, we'll save some dollars here and we'll do this ourselves, sometimes taking shortcuts is not necessarily the way. But certainly there's no shortage of private sales that do happen. It's not as big as it is in the US or even the UK or even New Zealand, but there is still plenty of private sales occurring, and that may suit you. That may be something there may be a home there that you're able to talk to the seller and you're able to negotiate a price, and happy days. But you need to make sure you get some professional assistance with that.
Yeah, TV. I think the thing is, at the end of the day, the actual contract itself between a private seller and a private buyer should contain exactly the same information, and exactly the same conditions. What you'd be doing though is cutting out a middleman. You're not going to have a real estate agent in between, and I guess the agent in the box guy which we'll have a chat to, might provide you some guidance as to the things to consider, but not really play an integral role like a real estate agent would. So yeah, it's not a bad thing, but there's a reason why the real estate agents get paid what they do, and that is their level of involvement and experience in the process. So if you can find a way to get that same outcome and also make sure that your contracts are watertight and cover everything that they need to, but you don't need to pay that level of real estate agent fees, then good luck to you. You absolutely should go down that way. There's no harm, but that is not a disclaimer to have a very leaky sale contract. There's no point trying to save the money on a sales fee if your sale contract has got bullet holes all the way through it.
And that's, as I say, my direction with that is looking at home buyers and the options they have available to them. As I say, this is more, sometimes home buyers may be looking in only one avenue, but there may be a house that's right up their alley. I had a classic. This is a great little example. I had a classic of, in fact, a family member of mine who knocked on the door. We've kept on walking past this home. A well-established and area, in fact, western suburbs, and was so keen about this property and got more and more, and they chatted about it and discussed it, and came back and made some comment to me with regard to it. And in the end, they put a little note in the went for their walk one night and decided, no, let's do it. So they put a note in the door and said, hey, would you be interested in having a chat? And that, guess what? They end up having a very amicable sale and a very good settlement. But again, that was one of those unique situations. But again, both parties secured, engaged, employed, whatever you want to call it. They employed specialists that have an understanding of the market, having an understanding of the documents required, have an understanding of the special condition required, and as you say, ensure there were no bullet holes in the paperwork, so that we're talking about some significant money. And so they got the right advice and got the right people to assist in putting that all together. So private sale or not, you still need to arrange specialists to assist you, whatever that may be.
That just a quick example. 2 months ago, or maybe 3 months ago, I read in the paper a agent in Perth's western suburbs in Cottesloe did exactly that. They had a buyer. They knew what sort of property they wanted. They had the budget, and I'll tell you what the figure is in just a moment. But they had a budget in mind, and this real estate agent very proactively went and looked for properties that fit the criteria, knocked on the door of someone that had no intention of selling their property whatsoever. They asked for a 3-day, 72-hour authority to bring someone through, this buyer. The buyer walked through the door, loved the property, made an offer of $7.3 million. The seller went, oh my God, at that sort of price, maybe we should consider selling, slept on it, woke up and signed the contract. And the deal was done. Now, whether that's 500,000 or 1.2 million or 7.3 million, it's a lot of money, and it's worthwhile spending probably a bit of extra money, just making sure that when you're dealing with the big bucks that real estate is, that you're going to get it right, especially if that's not your area of expertise. Which
is ironical that you tell me that story, because only last night I had a message to give a long-standing client of mine who regularly rings, well, not regularly, that's not quite true, but would ring me in all cases when it comes to things that he wants to address property-wise, and similar situation where he has been advised from an eastern states party that they were very, very keen in buying his property, and it's money that you certainly wouldn't sneeze at. Again, we're talking about above the hundreds of thousands. We're talking about in the millions, but it just goes to show that it does happen. And I know for a fact that it's happened on a smaller scale. I've had people personally have contacted me with regard to property that I own, and would I be interested in selling. So it does happen, and it is an option, but it's important that you get, as we emphasise all along, it's important that you get professional and proper assistance if that's the way you go.
TV, If you might want to bring out your bell, mate, I'm just going to ask you for maximum 120 seconds. I just want to quickly go back to the WA market, both the sales and rental market and the stats, and exactly where both markets are, because I think I've seen a bit of a shift in the stats, which supports the fact that this sting has gone out of the market. So do you want to time me for 2 minutes? Go.
I've got you covered. You're done.
Okay,
You're ready.
cool.
You're on. I was going to go to you next
I'll,
anyway.
I'll firstly go to the rental market. So the rental market is staying very, very strong. The level of supply in the rental market is slightly increased. I think we're probably bang on a vacancy rate of 1%. We're still under 3,000 available rentals through Perth, but it is slightly up. But overall, it's still very, very strong. And the property managers that I deal with are still saying that there's many people coming to very few home opens, lots of applications coming in. So the rental market's still very strong. Coincidentally, I checked on Geraldton's rental market again, and currently, and this is the lowest I've ever seen it. If you want to rent a property in Geraldton, including units or houses, currently in Geraldton, there are 43 properties available through the whole of Geraldton. So it was only a couple of months ago, TV, that number was 65, 70, and we said, oh, never seen it that low. So that market in Geraldton is just getting tighter and tighter. But more so to the sale market, what's going on in Perth, and the fact that the agents are commenting that the sting has certainly come out. Whilst this volume of sales transactions has been pretty consistent over the last few months, excepting the lockdown weekends that we've had, what I have seen this week in particular is actually a spike in the number of listings available. So for the first time in probably 4 months, the available listings has gone just over the 9,000 mark. Now, when it was as tight, we saw it go down to about 7,200 or 7,300 listings, which is super, super tight. But we've seen just in the last month, not so much a drop in transactions, but the availability of alternative properties is the reason why I think we've actually seen that absolute sting go out of the market, because the buyers that are out there have got a few other properties to be looking at, and so therefore the fear of missing out is a bit less, because they know that if they miss out on one, there is a handful of other properties to have a go at. So I'll watch that supply side a lot over the next couple of weeks, and see if we actually even move to a greater level of supply. The final line on that is that we do know that there are, with the really great market that we've had for sellers, that there is a level of profit taking in there as well, as we see in the stock market. So when people know that they can get really, really good money, it sometimes will affect their decision to sell. And I have no doubt in my mind that in the last 6 months, we've actually seen people sell because the market is so good for selling. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting selling market over the next month.
Ding, 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 ding. You did well. You were 3 seconds early. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Hey, just quickly, talking about the sting gone out of the market, what is interesting is that I saw the other day where they're still saying the values, the prices are still below 214. Is that the feedback you're getting?
I haven't seen the data. I haven't looked at the data to work out whether that is the case. Oh yeah, I guess that. I mean, that's what I've been hearing real estate agents and commentators talk about over the last couple of months. So why don't we save that till next week, where I can actually do a bit of research and look at what the data is from 2014, and look at the most recent quarterly data now, and actually, with a level of certainty, make a comment on that. How about that?
That would be good if you did a bit of heavy lifting like that. That'd be fantastic, I reckon. That'd be just amazing. Hey,
oh mate, I'm one for heavy lifting. I do all the heavy lifting for this show, for instance.
Hey, just quickly, what I will tell you, we've got time for a little ad break. On the long weekend in June, well, remember this program is got two illustrious sponsors in Champion Bay Settlements and Dedicated Property Management that happen to be our respective businesses. A lot of money put into it.
Oh, mate.
Hey, but in all seriousness, the Geraldton Amateur Golf Championship 2021, which Champion Bay Settlement sponsor, in fact, and have been for some 40 years or so. But it's a 90-year event. It's been going for some 90 years. In between, it's had a couple of breaks with the World War, and of course, then the last year, of course, with COVID. So would you believe? Who would have thought? So this year, and the club captain contacted me during the week, and already they've got some fantastic numbers that are registered. And there's a Friday event, and again, not normally this far out would we have the numbers, but I think he said something in the vicinity of 50 or 60 people have already registered. If you are in the metro area or the country and you're listening to this podcast or you're watching our stream and you're a golfer, great event. If you've not been to Geraldton, do yourself a favour. The golf courses up there. There are two. You've got the Geraldton Golf Club and Spalding Park. Spalding Park Golf Club do a Pro-Am. Geraldton does the Geraldton Amateur Open. Great event. And Dedicated Property Management and Property Avenue WA are going to sponsor Friday's event. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, and I own Dedicated Property Management, so I'm ecstatic. I'm very excited to hear that news.
So I would like to think
happy to be involved.
I think so if you're going to play golf, so it's over the weekend. So the main event is Saturday and Sunday, and there's a combined Stableford event on Friday, and you've got no idea what a combined Stableford event is, do you? Hey?
Yeah,
do you know what
combined.
that is?
It's combined.
Yeah, yep, that's it. So you and I will. I'll keep plugging that, but that'll be worthwhile. Hey, listen, question time. Discover the answers to your property questions. The question I've got this week was: I'm buying a property for investment purposes, but I'm unsure what name to put it in. Is it okay if I put in my own name or sort it out later? And my immediate answer to that was absolutely not. Do you just put it in your name without doing it? And it gets back to what we've been discussing before. If you're buying a property for investment or for any reason, really, you must. And in this case, I then delved a bit further. And in this case, this particular person who was asking the question is buying for investment purposes and, in fact, setting up a self-managed super fund, which goes to another extent. And there's two reasons why you don't just put it in your name and sort it out later, and no shortage of occasions does that happen. In fact, I caught up with a lawyer friend of mine today, and we were actually talking about this. And as he pointed out, one of the things you've got to be very, very careful about, if you only put it in your name and then decide that you want to just change it, it's not that simple, because guess what? There's a thing called stamp duty. And if you don't liaise with the agent, or more particularly don't liaise with your accountant and your financial planner and perhaps even your property advisor before you write up a contract, if you then go and put in Oscar de Souza's name, and in actual fact it was meant to be put in Oscar's self-managed superannuation fund, then you could get pinged for double duty. So if you're buying a property for say 450, 480,000, you're up for about $21,000, $22,000 in stamp duty. If you put it in Oscar's name only and then sort of say, oh, I'll sort it out later, and the agent says, no problems, we can sort this out later, we'll do a variation, absolutely can you not do that, because you're putting yourself at enormous risk with regard to double stamp duty, which, as I say, in the vicinity of you buying a property, let's say for 450, 480,000, all of a sudden $20,000 stamp duty can suddenly be $40,000+ stamp duty.
Yeah. No, that's really straightforward advice, and obviously very good advice, TV, as well. And like anything, just make sure the whole she'll be right, mate thing never ever works out. And in this case, is it possible that you can go with the she'll be right? Yeah, if you've got a spare 20 grand, but that probably defeats the purpose of buying an investment property and trying to make money. So, just get the right advice. It probably won't even cost you a lot. It'll save you a lot of money, because she'll be right never ever works.
It doesn't. And of course, in this case, then there's finance involved. And with finance, of course, if you're doing a self-managed fund, a super fund can't borrow money. So therefore, you've got to get what they call a bear trust. And so these things are all very important, because the other issue, other than stamp duty, because of taxation implications and finance implications, you need to ensure that that contract is identifying what it's meant to identify. So it needs to identify the custodian, which is the bear trust buying the property, on behalf of the super fund, and that needs to be identified both in the contract and also in the special conditions. So it's quite involved, but you need to speak to someone who understands and knows this stuff, because it can be a very costly exercise if you don't do it.
Yeah. And look, I'm not one. I mean, an accountant can typically be a good person. A settlement agent, a conveyancer is a good person to discuss that with, or a financial planner. But from my point of view, easily put my hand up and say, that's not my domain. What I could do is refer you to the right person. But, and for those real estate people that are out there that may attempt to provide this sort of guidance or advice, unless you know, don't do it, because at the end of the day, if it's going to cost someone an extra 20 grand because of the advice that you gave them, it will fall back on your shoulders. So just steer them in the right direction if you don't have that level of expertise.
Yep. Very much so. We're going gangbusters tonight, so much so I will leave it at that question for now. But the headlines, I've had some really good headlines, and I'll quickly run through those for you, because one of them was that first home buyers fear missing out more than overpaying for property. And I read this article, it was actually on realestate.com, and I wondered, would that apply? And I'll get your thoughts on this, again, talking to your little Saturday morning chat with your buddy. Would that be more a case where the article read along the lines that exhausted first home buyers fear they're overpaying for property in the boom market, but are diving into buying anyway? Is that a situation that is more an eastern state scenario than perhaps a WA scenario?
Specifically for first home buyers?
Well, that was what the survey was about. It was more about the first home buyers, but you can generalise it if you want.
I'll generalise. Yeah, I think I'd probably generalise it to say buyers of property that have got that fear of missing out versus, and therefore are paying more. I don't think we could put everyone in the same category or in the same basket there, TV. I reckon there are elements of both. There would some people be over the last 6 months that may even have a level of buyer's remorse, and in review would say, oh my God, we just paid 10 grand, 15 grand or whatever, too much for it, but we just had to get it, otherwise we were going to miss out. I'm sure there'd be those sorts of people. I know firsthand that there are other people that were not prepared to play the game, and were basically happy to sit tight and sit back and wait for the time period when things start to settle down a bit, which, as we've discussed today, is round about now. It probably has started to settle a little bit, and that might actually generate a bit more buyer activity over the next 2 to 3 months. We'll wait and see. So, but no, I definitely think that there'd be a number of people over the last 6 months that got so impatient, so frustrated, and had such a high level of FOMO that, yes, they paid over the odds, probably a bit too much, than what they really would have liked to, because of the fear of missing out. No question.
The other thing being is that I read an article which I haven't got to fully review, but it's really interesting, the number of articles about property around the world. And one of the headlines was why home prices are skyrocketing around the world, causing buyers, so that it's not just WA now, it's become worldwide. And they are saying that it's the skyrocketing around the world causing buyers to panic. But that's been the case in WA for quite a while. So it's interesting now that this is being quite a flow-on effect. And I read somewhere, and it might have been in this article, where people, similar to what we're doing, we're talking about regional Australia, where people are identifying regional Australia. I gave you those stats last week. I think there was something like the net balance of people migrating to out of New South Wales and Victoria to WA and Queensland. Similar sort of situations happening around the world where people are identifying areas that have got a bit more space, there's more room, there's more clean air, there's less population around. So it's interesting that when you read articles of this nature, the COVID effect has had an effect on people's thinking of where they're living rather than being in city and being in close quarters, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm sure it has, TV. And you know what? The other thing I really look forward to having a chat with Kieran about when we get the opportunity is not just his first home buyer experience, but the other thing we know is from a profession point of view, he deals in mental health, or rather works in mental health. And it's something that we've actually touched on during our show, but probably going back, I don't know, is it 6 months? Where it was a bit more during the COVID period, halfway through the COVID period, and the effect that COVID was having on people's mental health, specifically when we're talking about the pressures on the real estate market for people that are selling, for people that are wanting to buy, for people that are missing out on rentals, and for those that are, facing homelessness as well. We haven't touched on it for a while, and I hope that we have some time that we can talk to Kieran about it outside of his first home buyer journey, and just raise that topic again. I was at a school board meeting tonight, and the P&F have actually spent a lot of time focusing on not just the kids but on the parents actually over the last couple of months, and in particular provided different types of mental health workshops or whatever. I think one of the biggest positives that's come out of this COVID period for us as a society is the focus on mental health. And again, when it comes to property decisions, and we're talking about big sums of money, we're talking about employment, we're talking about major financial decisions, it's got to have some sort of an impact on people's mental health. And ultimately, we're all people, mate, and we want to make sure that that our friends and family and people, our neighbours, are all mentally strong.
Which another headline before I go to the if question, and we'll maybe touch on that next week when we got JB on board, where this was on the SBS News, although it's been publicised in other avenues as well, where the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, has pledged $10 billion to build social housing in the budget reply speech, which I thought was very interesting, but it's something that I think the target was something like 30,000 dwellings in 5 years. Does that seem a little bit far-fetched?
I think so.
30,000 dwellings in 5 years is an awful lot of dwellings, and we've got a building industry that's already struggling. I just think sometimes politicians, I just don't think that sort of stuff is common sense. It's just illogical.
Yeah, none of that. What that really does, though, is then affect the credibility of not just those types of policies, but it affects the credibility of everything else, I guess, that he says, or that the party says. And yeah, there's probably a whole lot more damage done by making representations than to that extent than actually positive, where people sit there and go, "Wow, that sounds good." It's pretty unthinkable over the next 5 years that could even be achieved. Probably does the party a bit more harm than good. That said, that's just our opinion, TV, and we might be wrong with it, but no, that one's a bit of a no-brainer.
As I say, we're allowed to have an opinion, and we do that, and we don't agree with everything, but I just found it was a headline that I thought, wow. And when you look at it, you go, hang on, you're talking about 30,000 dwellings in 5 years? That just seems very, very unrealistic. I'm sorry.
30,000.
30,000 with a target of 30,000 dwellings in 5 years. I'm sorry. I just don't. Yeah. Anyway, there we go. Hey,
TV, I'm getting excited.
If question.
That's exactly. You read my mind. I'm getting excited.
I know.
Because
I'm all over
I have no idea what this if question is going to be.
No, you don't.
And I'm excited.
And you can answer it in any way you like, really. There's a number of ways you could answer this. But if you could change one thing in the world. Now, it might be the world, or it might be the West Australian world. It may be the Australian world. But if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Gee, mate, that's a bit profound, and
I know.
that's a
But
massive
with
question.
with my if questions, there's no right or wrong.
I would have to probably sound like a Miss World contestant. With my answer, I think with what I'm about.
Hang on. Miss World, hang on. Keep
Well,
going.
hang on. Well, you haven't heard my answer. When you hear my answer, you might sit there and go, "This isn't the Miss Santa Monica beauty pageant or whatever." But honestly, it would have to be hunger and starvation. So solving the world problem of hunger and starvation and malnutrition. That's what it would be.
I'm impressed with you. I am indeed. Mine is having care and respect for for others.
Yeah,
Just respecting everyone else, respecting everyone's beliefs, understanding other people have got their own issues, understanding we're all different, understanding that people have got different beliefs, and respecting that. Just care for everybody. I just even a simple thing of driving down the street and someone pulls along off the side of the road for another oncoming car, just acknowledge that person and say thank you. You only got to give them a little wave or a little bit of acknowledgement. It can be that simple. And I think if we could just do that and understand and just take a deep breath and respect others, no matter what they be. I read or didn't read, but I watched a show last night where this young girl, her name was Nicole Dowling, I think was her surname.
Oh, yeah, I saw this.
I mean, the question was asked, would you do it again? She stopped. She saw this naked man. Remember that incident a couple of years ago, and he was injured. He was screaming for help, and no one came to his assistance. And this young girl, quite an attractive young girl, and she'd taken an effort. And I watched her and listened to her last night, and I thought, wow, how I'd seen the story before, but then they had her on a program last night, and that to me was what highlighted this question tonight was, wowie. Would I have done that? To be really, really honest, I probably wouldn't have. I probably had the right. I could probably say yes, I would, but would I? Would I have gone and driven past and stopped and said, "Hey, that man needs help"? I'd like to think I would, but there's probably a chance I wouldn't have.
Yeah, I saw that on Flashpoint TV, and it was a
Flashpoint. That's right.
it was an interesting debate amongst who was it? Tom Percy, QC. He was
Yeah, that's
on
right.
there, and Tim McMillan, who's the host there, and yeah, it was a really interesting debate, and I was asking myself the same question, and I think my initial reaction is exactly the same as you. At first glance, I'd say, yeah, of course I would, because I can be the hero and nothing's going to happen to me and all that, but it's a pretty confronting sight when they showed back the CCTV vision of what she was faced with, and not just her, not just being a person getting faced with that, but it's nighttime. She's a young, attractive female as well. That situation could have gone so many different ways.
Yep.
She had the bravery to do what she did. When I first saw her on the news and they were replaying it and they screenshot it or they sort of scanned over to her, and she was actually a bit emotional seeing that footage from was it a couple of months ago. I think it was a couple of months ago.
2 years ago.
Was it 2 years ago? Right. Okay.
Yep.
And it really was affecting her emotionally. I'm human. I have to admit, when I first saw that, I thought, that's a bit of sensationalization, or it's a little bit dramatic, isn't it? But when I actually stopped and gave it a bit more thought and became a bit more caring and compassionate, like what you just said, I thought, well, hang on, this is something that will probably affect her for the rest of her life. She's going to have that vision. There was a massive amount of risk in it, which she probably didn't consider at the time, and she'd actually do it again. So totally agree with you, mate. Hats off to her, and yeah, that's inspiring for other people to show that same level of care across the board.
Mate, we got to go. I thought we were going to do under an hour today, and guess what? We've done it again.
Yeah,
Mate,
yeah.
it's been an absolute pleasure. For those people that joined us, I hope you've enjoyed it. Those people that join us later on, please, we always welcome you to send us questions, be it an email, be it on our Facebook page. You can access through Twitter, Instagram. I was going to say Telegram then. Facebook, or we've got our live chat line. We're on every Tuesday night. We do a live stream. Wednesday, you're able to get access through your normal podcast platforms. So your Apple and your Spotify and all the others. That's available on Wednesdays for your audio if you want to listen while you're driving or you're doing your gym or whatever the case may be. Thanks again. Been a great week. Look forward to doing it all again. OD, have a great week, mate. I think we need to warm up for our golf. I reckon we need to prepare ourselves for the big golf coming up for the long weekend in June. Take care, all. We'll see you soon, and happy buying, happy selling.